Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. It is Tuesday, May the 4th, 2021, or in the Hebrew calendar, IR 225781. It is what is considered here in the United States, I'm not sure about other parts of the world, but also as Star Wars Day, because one of the quotes in there is, "May the Force be with you," and this is May 4th, so I think we're all saying, "May the 4th be with you." So I'm hoping that you're having a wonderful day. I am at home in the beautiful mountains of western North Carolina, and it is sunshiny right now. It's a beautiful day, and it's also been raining off and on. It rained really hard yesterday. And it might be raining hard again today. So if you hear a lot of noise from the rain, that's what it is. It's also been thundering and lightning, and I love storms if they're in the daytime. Not too much if it's at night, but during the daytime, I just love it. So we're going to begin our reading today in 1 Samuel, and I wanted to give a shout out to all of these other people who are listening, from Boardman, Ohio, Tucson, Arizona, Johnson City, Tennessee, Los Angeles, California, San Diego, California, Princeton, West Virginia, Marianna, Florida, Prairie Village, Kansas, Huff, Ohio, Hough. My grandmother had a doctor by the name of Dr. Huff. That's how she pronounced her name, and that's how it was spelled. So I'm assuming that's how it's spelled. If not, just please correct me in the comments section below. And Lake Charles, Louisiana. So, it's thundering again, already starting. That's great. My grandmother always told me that thunder was God's voice and lightning was His presence. And whenever one of my granddaughters was really small, she got kind of scared about during a thunderstorm, and people were telling her all these different stories, and it wasn't calming her down. But as soon as I told her that, she calmed down immediately, and she just stood at the window and just watched it. She loved it. And we do know, though, that whenever they were at Mount Sinai, they said that thunderings, when God was speaking to, there would be thunderings and there would be lightnings. So I guess that's what it is all the time. I'm not sure, but it's nice to think that anyway. Okay, so Samuel is actually, in Hebrew, is Shmuel. And there's a note in here in my Bible about how to actually pronounce it, and I'll get to that in a moment. But that is spelled Shin, Mem, Vav, Aleph, and Aleph, and then Lamed, and then there's a space, and then there's an Aleph. So that means Shmuel 1, because Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet. So that's Shmuel. For the second book of Samuel, that'll be Shmuel Beit. So it'll be spelled the same way, but instead of that last letter being an Aleph, it'll be the letter Beit. So, just one moment. Okay, so it's just, the note in my Bible says Shmuel is derived from Shem El, Shem, space E-L, name of God, but sounds like Shaul Miel, asked from God. And I probably will not remember how to say it that way, because all I got to see Shmuel. So hopefully, God will correct me when I get to there, but in my reading. But if not, then I will be saying Shmuel. So, but at the very beginning, there is always this introduction to each book of the Bible in my Bible. And it says right here, The date and authorship of 1 Samuel cannot be determined with certainty. Many details and dialogue sections indicate that the author either was an eyewitness or had prophetic insight into the details of the narrative. Since David's death is not recorded until 1 Kings 2:10, one might conclude that the book was composed before his death. Because of several mentions of Yehuda, Judah, and Israel, however, some scholars believe it was compiled after the nation was divided into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Yehuda. And you can find that information in 11:8, 1752, and 18:16. If this book was 1 Samuel is where those references are. Yet an argument can be made that other passages appear to distinguish Israel and Yehuda well before the division took place. Although both books spare the name of the prophet Samuel, he may have written only one part of 1 Samuel, because 1 Chronicles 29:29 mentions the records of Nathan the prophet and Gad the seer. Nathan and Gad have also been proposed as contributors to 1 Samuel. So I just thought that was like a little interesting side note. So beginning in chapter 1, verse 1, there was a man from Ramathaim Zophim in the hills of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zoph, from Ephrat. He had 2 wives, one named Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city every year to worship and sacrifice to Adonai Zavaot in Shiloh. The 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinhas, were Kohanim of Adonai there. One day, when Elkanah was sacrificing, he gave a portion of the sacrifice to his wife Peninnah and portions to each of her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved Hannah, even though Adonai had kept her from having children. Her rival taunted her and made her feel bad, because Adonai had kept her from having children. He did the same thing every year. Let me start that verse over again. Verse 7. He did the same every year, and each time she went up to the house of Adonai, she taunted her so much that she would cry and not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, "Hannah, why are you crying, and why aren't you eating? Why be so sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" So Hannah got up after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Eli the Cohen was sitting on his seat by the doorpost of the temple of Adonai. In deep depression she prayed to Adonai and cried. Then she took a vow. She said, "Adonai Zavaot," which means Lord of Hosts, "if you will notice how humiliated your servant is, if you will remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give your servant a male child, then I will give him to Adonai for as long as he lives, and no razor will ever come on his head." She prayed for a long time before Adonai, and as she did so, Eli was watching her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart. Her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Eli said to her, "How long are you going to stay drunk? Stop drinking your wine." But Hannah answered, "No, my lord, I am a very unhappy woman. I have not drunk either wine or other strong liquor. Rather, I have been pouring out my soul before Adonai. Don't think your servant is a worthless woman, because I have been speaking from the depth of my distress and anger." Then Eli replied, "Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant what you have asked of him." She replied, "May your servant find favor in your sight." So the woman went on her way, and she ate, and her face was no longer sad. They got up early in the morning and worshipped before Adonai, then returned and came to their house in Ramah. Now I wonder, and hopefully we'll find out later on as we're reading, and if not, maybe I can find out whenever I'm doing deep research, if Elkanah was actually a Cohen, because it says that we've read earlier that the Cohens would give food to their wives and their children, and there was certain specific or the sacrifice, and but there were certain restrictions on that sacrifice that they could feed to their families, like whether or not the daughter was married, and whether or not she was a virgin, and all those things, and so that's what it sounds like there, doesn't it? So going on, he says Elkanah had sexual relations with Hannah, his wife, and Adonai remembered her. She conceived, and in due time she gave birth to a son, whom she named Shmuel, because I asked Adonai for him. The husband, Elkanah, went up with all his household to offer the yearly sacrifice to Adonai and fulfill his vow. But Hannah did not go up, explaining to her husband, "Not till the child has been weaned. Then I will bring him, so that he can appear before Adonai and live forever." Now I wonder if that weaning would be about 2 years, and that's whenever we do it now. But hopefully I'll find that out too. Her husband Elkanah answered her, "Do what seems good to you. Stay here until you have weaned him. Only may Adonai bring about what he said." So the woman stayed behind and nursed the child until she weaned him. After weaning him, she took him up with her, along with 3 young bulls, a bushel of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of Adonai in Shiloh, even though he was just a child. After the bull had been slaughtered, the child was brought to Eli, and she said, "My lord, as surely as you live, my lord, I am the woman who stood here near you, praying to Adonai. I prayed for this child, and Adonai has granted the request I asked of him. Therefore, I too have loaned him to Adonai. As long as he lives, he is on loan to Adonai." And he prostrated himself there before Adonai. Chapter 2. Then Hannah prayed. She said, "My heart exults in Adonai. My dignity has been restored by Adonai. I can gloat over my enemies because of my joy at your saving me. No one is as holy as Adonai, because there is none to compare with you, no rock like our God. Stop your proud boasting. Don't let arrogance come from your mouth, for Adonai is a God of knowledge, and he appraises actions. The bows of the mighty are broken, while the feeble are armed with strength. The well-fed hire themselves for bread, while those who are hungry hunger no more. The barren woman has borne 7, while the mother of many wastes away. Adonai kills and makes alive. He brings down to the grave, and he brings up. Adonai makes poor, and he makes rich. He humbles, and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust, lifts up the needy from the trash pile. He gives them a place with leaders and assigns them seats of honor. For the earth's pillars belong to Adonai. On them he has placed the world. He will guard the steps of his faithful, but the wicked will be silenced in darkness. For it is not by strength that a person prevails. Those who fight Adonai will be shattered. He will thunder against them in heaven. Adonai will judge the ends of the earth. He will strengthen his king and enhance the power of his anointed. Elkanah went home to Ramah while the child began ministering to Adonai under the direction of Eli the Cohen. Eli's sons were scoundrels who had no regard for Adonai. The rule these Kohanim followed in dealing with the people was that when anyone offered a sacrifice, the Cohens servant would come while the meat was stewing with a 3-pronged fork in his hand. He would stick it in the pan, kettle, cauldron, or pot, and the Cohen would take for himself whatever the fork brought up. This is how they dealt with all the people of Israel who came there to Shiloh. The Cohen's servant would actually come before the fat had burned to smoke and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give the Cohen meat he can roast, because he doesn't want your meat stewed, but raw." Now remember, we read back, I think it was in Leviticus, where God was given instructions for the food, and even for every normal people, you were supposed to not eat raw meat, which is eating blood with the meat. So whenever you eat any meat, it's supposed to be well done, not eat pink or bloody or anything like that. Even though people do that today, it's wrong. So if ordinary people can't do it, then the priest can't do it either. And there's specific instructions for the priest. And you will understand this by going through those long, boring parts that we read earlier. That's why they're in there. So when you come to sections like this, you will see, it'll make sense to you. Because otherwise you'd be thinking, well, what does it matter if how the priests eat it? I don't understand why this was wrong. Well, now, because you've dealt with those long, boring parts, you understand. Verse 16. If the man answered, "First let the fat burn to smoke, then take as much as you want," he would say, "No, give it to me now, or I'll take it by force." The sin of these young men was very serious in Adonai's view, because they treated offerings made to Adonai with contempt. But Shmuel ministered in the presence of Adonai, wearing a linen ritual vest, even though he was only a child. Each year his mother would make him a little coat and bring it when she came up with her husband to offer the annual sacrifice. Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May Adonai give you children from this woman because of the boy you have loaned to Adonai." Then they would go home. So Adonai took notice of Hannah, and she conceived and bore 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the boy Shmuel grew in the presence of Adonai. When Eli was very old, he heard about everything his sons were doing to all Israel, and that they were having sex with the women doing service at the door of the tent of meeting. He asked them, "Why are you doing things like this? I am hearing bad reports about you from all these people." "No, my sons, I don't hear Adonai's people spreading a single good report. If a person commits a sin against another person, the judges can mediate between them. But if a person commits a sin against Adonai, who can intercede for him?" However, they wouldn't pay attention to what their father said, because Adonai had decided to kill them. The child Shmuel kept growing and gaining favor both with Adonai and with people. A man of God came to Eli and told him, "Here is what Adonai says. Didn't I reveal myself to your ancestors' clan when they were in Egypt, serving as slaves in Pharaoh's household? Didn't I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my Cohen, go up to my altar, burn incense, and wear a ritual vest in my presence? Didn't I assign to your ancestors' clan all the offerings of the people of Israel made by fire? So why are you showing such disrespect for my sacrifices and offerings, which I order to be made at my dwelling? Why do you show more honor to your sons than to me, making yourselves fat with the choicest parts of all the offerings of Israel, my people?" Therefore, Adonai, the God of Israel, says, I did indeed say that your family and your father's family would welcome my presence forever. But now, Adonai says, forget it. I respect those who respect me, but those who despise me will meet with contempt. The day is coming when I will break your strength and the strength of your father's family, so that no one in your family will live to old age. I don't know if you heard it, but there was thunder just a moment ago, and it's starting to rain. It rained pretty good and hard. Verse 32. At a time when Israel is prospering, you will see a rival in my dwelling, and never will anyone in your family live to old age. Still, I won't cut off every one of your men from my altar, because that would make your eyes grow dim, and you would waste away. Nevertheless, all your descendants will die young. Your sign that this will occur will be what happens to your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. They will both die on the same day. I will raise up for myself a faithful Cohen who will do what I want and what I intend. I will make his family faithful, and he will serve in the presence of my anointed one forever. Everyone left in your family will come, prostrate himself before him for a silver coin or a loaf of bread, and say, Please, won't you give me some work as a Cohen so I can have a scrap of bread to eat? So we can see here that when God wants something done, he's going to get it done. He'll call you to do it. And if you're willing to do it, and you do it with all your strength about it, he will be there and he'll help you. But if you refuse to do it, or you refuse to try to do it right, his way, he'll find someone else. He will cut you off from that, and he'll find someone else. And he may not let you do anything else for him. And there's serious consequences for not doing what God tells you to do. Even if you don't do it, correctly at the very beginning, as long as you're trying, he will be right there with you, and he'll help you. And he'll guide you along the way, and he'll teach you. And soon you'll be an expert at it. Chapter 3. The child Shmuel continued ministry to Adonai under Eli's direction. Now in those days, Adonai rarely spoke. Isn't that awful? And visions were few. I can imagine that. I hear there's all these prophets today, but to let them be visions and prophesy, God very rarely speaking. I get visions and God's using me prophesying. I'm not sure whether he's called me to be a prophet or not, but he has. So I can't imagine, not getting visions. And I've gotten a lot of visions over the last, since I started back in 1990. And, actually, come to think about it, actually back in 1986, whenever I was carrying my son, I had dreams of what he was going to be and what his attitude would be like. And I didn't realize that he was teaching me to prophesy. So, but even more, but as the years go on, and especially over the last year, I've gotten a lot more visions and dreams. Verse 2. Once, during that period, Eli had gone to bed. His eyes had begun to grow dim, so that it was hard for him to see. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Shmuel had lain down to sleep in the sanctuary of Adonai, where the ark of God was. Adonai called, Shmuel! And he answered, Here I am! Then he ran to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me? So that must have been Eli's voice that he actually heard. It was God's voice, but sounding like Eli. But he said, I didn't call you. Go back and lie down. So he went and lay down. Adonai called a second time, Shmuel! Shmuel got up, went to Eli and said, Here I am. You called me? And he answered, I didn't call my son. Lie down again. Now Shmuel didn't yet know Adonai. The word of Adonai had not yet been revealed to him. Adonai called, Shmuel! Again, a third time. He got up, went to Eli and said, Here I am. You called me. So, even though it was probably just the two of them in there, if it had been another sounding voice that he heard, then he would probably have went to Eli and said, Eli, somebody's calling my name. I'm here. Who is that? Is someone else in here or whatever? But instead, since he's hearing what sounds like Eli's voice, since he's going to Eli and saying specifically, you called me, then that must sound like Eli's voice. And I think that if I'm true about this, because I might be wrong, that may not have been what it sounded like, but if I am, I wonder if God did it like that so that he wouldn't be scared about hearing a strange voice. At last Eli realized it was Adonai calling the child. So Eli said to Shmuel, Go and lie down. If you are called again, say, Speak, Adonai, your servant is listening. Shmuel went and lay down in his place. And there's a little inside down here in my Bible that's at the bottom of the page. It says, To listen here means to obey. It is ironic that Eli instructed Shmuel to listen or obey the voice of God, while he did not teach his sons to do the same. Shmuel went and lay down in his place. Verse 10, Adonai came and stood, then spoke as at the other times, Shmuel! Shmuel! Then Shmuel said, Speak, your servant is listening. Adonai said to Shmuel, Look, I am going to do something in Israel that will make both ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. On that day I will do against Eli everything I have said with regard to his family, from beginning to end. For I have told him that I will execute judgments against his family forever, because of his wickedness in not rebuking his sons, even though he knew that they had brought a curse on themselves. Therefore, I have sworn to the family of Eli that the wickedness of Eli's family will never be atoned for by any sacrifice or offering. Isn't that terrible? Because, we do anything now and ask for forgiveness, and he'll forgive us. And back then, before Yeshua came, they do it a sacrifice or an offering and get forgiveness. But they can't be forgiven for what they've done. Shmuel lay there until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of Adonai. But Shmuel was afraid to tell Eli the vision. Then Eli called Shmuel. Shmuel, my son. He answered, Here I am. Eli said, What did he say to you? Please don't hide it from me. May God do whatever he said and worse if you hide from me anything he has said to you. So Shmuel told him every word and hid nothing. Eli replied, It is Adonai. Let him do what seems good to him. Shmuel kept growing. Adonai was with him, and he let none of his words fall to the ground. All Israel from Dan to Beersheba became aware that Shmuel had been confirmed as a prophet of Adonai. Adonai continued appearing in Shiloh, for Adonai revealed himself to Shmuel in Shiloh by the word of Adonai. So the word of Shmuel came to all Israel. This is chapter 4, verse 1. So the word of Shmuel came to all Israel. Israel went out to fight against the Plishtim. They ended up camped at Ebenezer, while the Plishtim camped at Aphek. The Plishtim grew up in battle formation against Israel. The battle was fierce. Israel was beaten by the Plishtim. They killed about 4,000 soldiers on the battlefield. When the army had returned to camp, the leaders of Israel asked, "Why has Adonai defeated us today before the Plishtim? Let's bring the ark for the covenant of Adonai from Shiloh to us, so that he will come among us and save us from our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh and brought from there the ark for the covenant of Adonai's Vayot, who was present above the cherubim. The two sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinhas, were there with the ark for the covenant of God. When the ark for the covenant of God entered the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout that resounded through the land. On hearing the shout, the Plishtim asked, "What does this great shout in the Hebrews' camp mean?" Then they realized that the ark of Adonai had arrived in the camp, and the Plishtim became afraid. They said, "God has entered the camp. We're lost. There was no such thing yesterday or the day before. We're lost. Who will rescue us from the power of these mighty gods?" Now in here it says gods is little gods. These are the gods that completely overthrew the Egyptians in the desert. Be strong and behave like men, you Plishtim, so that you won't become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be like men and fight. Now, I think it's kind of interesting that even though it's written little gods in here, that it says gods multiple. And whenever I looked it up, how it was written in Hebrew, it was written Elohim, which is plural for God. Which, so more, because El is one God. Elohim is more than one God. So we know that Yeshua and the Holy Spirit and God are all the same. They're three different. They're separate, but the same. And don't ask me to get any more any more detail than that, because I can't. I can't explain it any better than that. But it says, so there's God. There is three gods, in a sense. So not only did they say it gods like that, but I wondered if they recognized it as being Yeshua, Holy Spirit, and Adonai, that's what I was trying to say. Or if they were thinking multiple gods, and please Adonai, don't let me be calling up any demons into the room here. So I'm going to say these names just to give an example. Zeus, Aphrodite, Mars, Ares, where we know it's supposed to be the god of war, and Cupid, and I don't know all the gods, and I know there's Egyptian ones, but I don't know all their names either. I think there was one called Ra, I think, but I'm not sure of their names. But I know the Greek and Roman names, some of those, because of you taught those in school in mythology. So if that's what they were referring to. But I'm hoping that it was actually that they were recognized as a triune God, that Yeshua, the Holy Spirit, and God the Father. One other note about where it says that that these are the gods that completely overthrew the Egyptians in the desert in verse 8. When I looked it up in the King James, that verse is smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. But in the Hebrew does not mention anything about plagues. But it says just like it is here. And I wonder about the Egyptians in the desert, because did they get their information wrong? Or did some Egyptians come after them while they're in the desert as well? Or in the wilderness, because it actually says in the wilderness. So that's just another little thing. You might want to make a note of that question. That's what I do whenever I'm reading, is because God told me to take notes. So as I'm taking notes, I write down questions. I write down specific passages that I think that, I might want to find out more about later on, or so that I can compare them later on whenever I'm seeing it says later on, and it says something about something happening whenever they were entering the land of Egypt. Or there was a land, we'll go say they were entering the land of Egypt, go to the Goshen. Let's say that. And maybe it's giving more information later on. I could put that in there to get a better idea of the story. So, it also helped me understand more as I'm reading. So that's what things God told me to do whenever He told me to read. So, let's see. So starting in verse 10. The Philistine fought, Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. It was a terrible slaughter. 30,000 of Israel's foot soldiers fell. Moreover, the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. One of the soldiers, a man from Benjamin, ran and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and earth on his head, as a sign of mourning. As he arrived, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road, watching, because he was trembling with anxiety over the ark of God. When the man entered the city and told the news, the whole city began crying out. On hearing the cries, Eli asked, "What does this uproar mean?" So the man hurried, came to Eli and told him. Eli was 98 years old, and his gaze was fixed because he was blind. Now, isn't that interesting that Eli was 98, and God said that nobody would live to be old age? So 98 isn't considered old? But remember, he had said before that, people live at the very longest 120. The man said to Eli, "I'm the soldier that came. I escaped today from the battlefield." He asked, "How did things go, my son?" The one who had come with the news answered, "Israel fled before the Philistine, and there was a terrible slaughter among the people. Your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, also are dead. And the ark of God was captured." As soon as he mentioned what had happened to the ark of God, Eli fell backward off his seat next to the gate, broke his neck, and died, for he was an old man and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. His daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was pregnant and near delivery time. When she heard the news that the ark of God had been captured and that her father-in-law and husband were dead, she went into abnormal labor, bent over, and gave birth. As she was dying, the women standing by her said to her, "Don't be afraid, because you have given birth to a son." But she didn't answer or show any sign of recognition. She named the child Ichabod. That's I-Khavod. And it's spelled like, right here it says Ichabod without glory. It's spelled like Ichabod from the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Ichabod, saying, "The glory departed from Israel because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and husband." She said, "The glory of Israel has gone into exile because the ark of God has been captured." Chapter 5. The police team had captured the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the police team took the ark of God, brought it to the temple of Dagon, and set it next to Dagon. But early the next morning, when the people of Ashdod got up, there was Dagon, falling down with his face to the ground before the ark of Adonai. They took Dagon and set him in his place again. But early the following morning, when they got up, Dagon was falling down with his face to the ground before the ark of Adonai. This time, the head of Dagon and both hands lay there severed. This time, the head of Dagon and both hands lay there severed on the threshold. All that was left of Dagon was his torso. This is why, to this day, the priests of Dagon and those entering his temple will never walk on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod. Now, down here at the bottom of the page of my Bible, it says that Dagon had a man's head and hands, but the body of a fish. Now, I think it's funny that not only was the statue falling down, but it was falling down on his face, like somebody who had prostrated in front of the ark of God, and God, he would come and sit on the mercy seat of the ark. So I think it was, that right there should show. Should have shown them right then that that their God was actually bowing to the only one and true God, which we know that there was no actual God. It was just demons, and that was. I don't have any proof of this. I might find out later on that I'm correct, but right now this is just theology. That these demons, the reason why these statues were made to look like they were, was that's the way that the demons appeared to them. So a demon appeared to them with the body of a fish and the head and hands of a man. Because to me, why else would they make it look like that? So, I mean, I like I said, I might be wrong, but that's just my theory as of right now. Until God shows me otherwise. And there's been a lot of things though that don't give up on your thoughts. If you have thinkings like that, you might think, oh well, I mean, whatever your name is, Susie. This is just Susieology, or James. Well, this is just Jamesology. Whatever you're thinking, don't think, well, that's just my thought and it's probably wrong, because it might be right. There's a lot of things that I've thought like that. And I was like, well, I don't have any proof of it. This is what I think. And then later on, God showed me that, yes, I was correct. So it wasn't that I was actually thinking it. It was that actually what it was God telling me that. He was revealing that information to me. And that but I just didn't, I guess, wasn't sure of myself that it was actually God revealing it to me or my own personal thinking. So that's like it was with these, because I used to think that these so-called gods were just something that was made up. And then for the last year or two, I got to thinking about how it might have actually been demons. So that became like biology to me. And then recently, I've been reading and heard from other very reliable sources that I was correct. So that wasn't my personal thinking, my knowledge. It was God revealing that to me. So just don't force your beliefs on other people unless you have something to back it up. Just be like me, where you say, well, that's just my thinking. I could be wrong. So until God shows me otherwise, that's what I'm going to think, and be open to other ideas, because what if you are wrong? So beginning in verse 6, Adonai began oppressing the people of Ashdod. He ravaged them, striking Ashdod and its surrounding area with tumors. When the people of Ashdod came to understand what was happening, they said, the ark of the God of Israel can't remain with us, because he is oppressing us and our God Dagon. They summoned all the leaders of the Plishtim and asked, what are we to do with the ark of the God of Israel? They answered, have the ark of the God of Israel carried to Gat. So they carried the ark of the God of Israel to Gat. But after it arrived there, Adonai oppressed that city, causing terrible panic. He struck the people of the city, great and small alike. Tumors broke out on them. Next they sent the ark of God to Ekron. But when the ark of God arrived in Ekron, the Ekronim shouted, now they've brought the ark of the God of Israel to us, to kill us and our people. So they summoned all the leaders of the Plishtim and said, send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place, so that it won't kill us and our people. Because death and panic pervaded the whole city. God's oppression was very heavy there. The people who didn't die were struck with the tumors, and the city's cries for help reached the skies. Chapter 6. The ark of Adonai was in the country of the Plishtim for 7 months. So I'm thinking, let's see, that it was actually, I wrote it down here somewhere because I made notes. So I was going back and okay, here it is. So we need to keep reading and then I'll get to that. Verse 2. The Plishtim summoned the priests and soothsayers and asked them, what are we to do with the ark of Adonai? Tell us how to send it back where it belongs. Now, isn't it interesting that they chose priests, which, so they think that these priests would know about, know a lot about the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of God, even though they were pagan priests. Verse 3, they said, if you do send off the ark of God of Israel, don't send it back empty, but return it with some sort of guilt offering for him. Then you will be cured, and you will learn why he has not stopped oppressing you." They asked, "What kind of guilt offering should we send him?" And they replied, 5 gold models of tumors and 5 gold rats, because that's how many leaders the Plishtim have. And you and your leaders all have the same illness. So make models of your tumors and models of your rats that are infesting your land, and show respect to the God of Israel. Maybe he will stop oppressing you, your gods, and your land. Why be obstinate like the Egyptians and Pharaoh were? When he had done his work among them, didn't they let the people go? And they left. Now take and prepare yourselves a new cart and 2 milk cows that have never been under a yoke. Harness the cows to the cart, but put their calves back in the shed. Then take the ark of Adonai and lay it on the cart. In a box next to it, put the gold objects you are sending back to him as a guilt offering. Then send it away to go off by itself. But watch to see if it goes up the road to Bet Shemesh in its own territory. If it does, he is responsible for this great tragedy. If not, we will know that it is not his oppression which has been over us, but that what has been happening to us has been only by chance." The men did it. They took 2 milk cows, harnessed them to the cart, and confined their calves to the shed. Then they put the ark on the cart, along with the box containing the gold rats and the models of the tumors. The cows made straight for the road to Bet Shemesh and took that route, mooing as they went and turning off neither to the right nor to the left. The leaders of the Plishtim followed them as far as the border of Bet Shemesh. Now, we know from back during the long, boring part where it's telling about building the tabernacle and building the ark, and that there were specific instructions for how it was supposed to be carried. So it's not supposed to be, the Ark of the Covenant was not supposed to be on a cart. There was poles that were supposed to go through it, and people were to actually carry it. But these people didn't know that, and they did what they thought was best. So at least they did see that there was something special about it, and gave something, a new cart. Instead of just something just old, Verse 13. The people of Bet Shemesh were harvesting their wheat in the valley when they looked up and saw the ark. Now this would have been around Shavuot time. Shavuot actually occurs this year about May 16th or 17th. And Shavuot occurs during wheat harvest. So this would have been, and I'm not exactly sure how long wheat harvest actually lasts. So my guess is that this was probably in the month of Sivan, which is the month right after Iyar. So around the 16th or 17th of May, we enter into the month of Sivan, which is Sivam. However, it could have been the following month, but that's my guess. But anyways, it would have been. It was definitely along this time of the year, like May. Could be like April, May, June, July. Spring or maybe early summer. This is my guess. They were so happy to see it. The cart entered the field of Yehoshua, the Beit Shimshi, and stood there by a big rock. They cut up the wood of the cart and offered up the cows as a burnt offering to Adonai. Then the Leviim removed the ark of Adonai and the box that was with it, which contained the gold objects, and put them on the big rock. That same day the men of Bet Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices to Adonai. Upon seeing this, the 5 leaders of the Plishtim returned that day to Ekron. Now, as we're going to start reading, I want you to remember what I said about how the ark was to be handled. And so the Israelites knew all that. The Plishtim had an excuse. They didn't know. They were not there whenever God gave the order. The Israelites were, even though these are the descendants, they've been taught this. They keep all this information is passed down. They know. So they have no excuse. Verse 17. The gold tumors which the Plishtim sent back as a guilt offering for Adonai were 1 each for Ashdod, Azal, Ashkelon, Gat, and Ekron. And the gold rats also corresponded to the number of all the cities of the Plishtim that belonged to the 5 leaders, fortified cities and country villages. The rock is a witness to this day of the great mourning which resulted from putting the ark of Adonai on it in the field of Yehoshua, the Bet Shimshi. For Adonai struck the people of Bet Shemesh for looking at the ark of Adonai. So I still don't understand why. What was wrong with looking at it? But we'll find out later on probably. So I made a note of that to try to find out that information. He killed 50,070 of the people. The people mourned because Adonai had struck them with such a terrible slaughter. The people of Bet Shemesh asked, "Who can stand before Adonai, this holy God? To whom can we send it to get it away from us?" They sent messengers to the people living in Kiryat Yearim with this message: "The Plishtim have returned the ark of Adonai. Come down and bring it back up with you." Chapter 7. So the men of Kiryat Yearim came and brought back the ark of Adonai. They took it to the home of Abinadab on the hill and appointed his son Eleazar to guard the ark of Adonai. From the day that the ark arrived at Kiryat Yearim, a long time elapsed. 20 years. All the people of Israel yearned for Adonai. Shmuel addressed all the people of Israel. He said, "If you are returning to Adonai with all your heart, then be done with the foreign gods and Ashtaroth that you have with you, and direct your hearts to Adonai. If you will serve only him, he will rescue you from the power of the Plishtim." So the people of Israel banished the Baalim and the Ashtaroth and served only Adonai. Shmuel said, "Gather all Israel to Mitzpah, and I will pray for you to Adonai." Oh, and God just told me this, that the reason why that the having the ark with them in the war with the Plishtim didn't help was because they were serving other gods. If they hadn't had all these idols with them, then were worshiping them, he would have helped them in the battle and they would have succeeded. So that's why they lost the battle. Going back to verse 5. Shmuel said, "Gather all Israel to Mitzpah, and I will pray for you to Adonai." So they gathered together at Mitzpah, drew water and poured it out before Adonai, fasted that day, and said there, "We have sinned against Adonai." Shmuel began serving as judge over the people of Israel at Mitzpah. When the Plishtim heard that the people of Israel had gathered together at Mitzpah, the leaders of the Plishtim marched up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard about this, they were afraid of the Plishtim. The people of Israel said to Shmuel, "Don't stop crying out to Adonai our God for us, to save us from the power of the Plishtim. Shmuel took a baby lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to Adonai. Now that's something I'm also curious about, because it always says lamb, but this point it says baby lamb. Wait a minute. So the lamb was always mentioned as lamb in its first year. So this says baby lamb. I wonder if it's how old that lamb is. Go back to verse 9. Shmuel took a baby lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to Adonai. Then Shmuel cried to Adonai for Israel, and Adonai answered him. As Shmuel was presenting the burnt offering, the Philistine advanced to attack Israel. But this time, Adonai thundered. But this time Adonai thundered violently over the Philistine, throwing him into such confusion that they were struck down before Israel. The men of Israel went out from Mizpah, pursuing the Philistine and attacking them all the way to Bethkar. So that just confirms what I just said, that God did tell me that the reason why they lost the battle the first time was because of the other gods. They were not worshiping Adonai only. Because now that they have, they've gotten rid of those other gods and they're going back to Adonai, now he's fighting on their behalf. Verse 12. Shmuel took a stone, placed it between Mizpah and Shin, and gave it the name Ebenezer, stone of help, explaining, Adonai has helped us until now. Thus the Philistines were humbled, so that they no longer entered Israel's territory, and the hand of Adonai was against the Philistines as long as Shmuel lived. The cities between Ekron and Gath, which the Philistines had captured from Israel, were restored to Israel, and Israel reduced all this territory from the power of the Philistines. There was also peace between Israel and the Amorite. Shmuel continued in office as judge of Israel as long as he lived. Year by year he would travel in a circuit that included Beth-El, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and in all these places he served as judge over Israel. Then he would return to Ramah, because that's where his home was, and he would judge Israel there too. He also built an altar there to Adonai. So in the next video, we'll start up in chapter 8. And I just want to make a little note here. So remember back in whenever we were reading in Exodus, I said that that just because it mentioned the name of the city Ramses does not necessarily mean that Ramses was the pharaoh at that time. And this right here just confirms that, because over here in chapter 4 in verse 1, it says that Israel went out to fight against the Philistines, setting up camp at Ebenezer. Okay, but over here in chapter 7, in verse 12, it says that Shmuel gave the place the name Ebenezer. So that means that that whenever they went out to fight them the first time, that at Ebenezer, that it wasn't named that at that time. But whenever this person was, whoever wrote this, they were telling you that it's in the same place. The battles took place in the same spot, even though the first time it didn't have that name. I'm not sure if it had a name before then, and if it was, what it was. But so you can't just say, well, because it says this, that's automatically. Like here in North Carolina, in in Canton, which is in Haywood County, there is a paper mill, and it is called now Evergreen Packaging. However, when I was growing up, and from the time it was built until, which was, I don't even know, I think like in the 30s or something like that, 1930s, until probably along the 1990s, maybe, it was always called Champion. And it's changed names several times since then. But I will always refer to it as Champion. People my age and older will always refer to it as Champion, more than likely. But people new to the area, someone that just moves here, if you mention, oh, well, I remember Champion doing this, that, and the other, they don't know what you're talking about. But if you mention, well, I remember Evergreen Packaging doing this back then, they'll know what you're talking about. So that's what it's the same thing, same idea. So, okay, so I know this went over, but I really wanted to finish up that part. And so I'll look forward to the next video. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and notification bell so that you'll be informed of future videos. And, if you have any comments, feel free to post them in the comments section. Any questions, put those in the comment section, and I will answer them as fast as I can. Have a wonderful and blessed rest of your day. Bye-bye.